Welcome. I'm Riley Karsh.
I'm Tova Kopan.
We are thrilled to bring you the We Go Boldly podcast.
Let's talk big burning questions, life changes, and maybe a bit of personal business.
Let's be bold and brave together. Are you ready?
I am. Here comes the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to We Go Boldly, the podcast. We are so happy to have you with us today. I am Riley. I'm here with my fantastical co-host, Tova, and we are diving more into the question, how is your heart today? Before we do that, let me say hello to Tova, ask her how she's doing today. Also, how is your heart, Tova? What's happening?
I don't know why there were so many questions.
I know, just pick one.
You just asked me so many questions. Like I don't know which question to answer. I don't know what to do. I got frozen.
All of the above.
All of the above. So how am I doing? How am I? I'm tired. I'm tired. Yesterday I sort of hit a wall. One of the things when my convalescence, is that what happened? Started, was like, I was very task mastery and I was like, okay, we're going to use this as an excuse for my kids to do all the chores that they should have already been doing and they should have been contributing into our house. And they were like, yes, we are going to be better. And that lasted like 2 weeks.
Solid 2 weeks though.
Yep. And then once it was clear that I was not going to die, they were like, cool, well, she can bend over, she's fine. And so like last night our schedule changed for the week. So they were hanging out with me, which of course I loved, but then I was researching this episode late. And then I just kind of had a little mini meltdown. I put on a audiobook that I was excited to listen to and just clean the house because I not cleaned, like scrubbed, but just like put things away places, like hung up coats. And so I'm very tired. I also did not sleep restfully. I got my COVID booster yesterday and that left me a little achy. So I couldn't get comfortable. There was a kid in my bed because he was having girl drama. So he wanted to talk about it last night before he went to sleep. So it was just like not restful sleep. And then, of course I woke up and there was underwear right next to the hamper. So we had a discussion about like maybe putting it in the hamper. So I don't know what we're going to do. This weekend, there's going to be some brainstorming about, because they are clearly frustrated with me and me going, put that away. That's not where your backpack goes. Put this away. Did you empty your backpack? And like this morning, they were all late to school because somebody forgot the homework. And I've been getting really on them about like, you're doing homework, you're reading for 20 minutes before you get your devices out. And I didn't remind my oldest because he's always been really vigilant about that. And it slipped through the cracks yesterday. So this morning he was panicking and doing his homework and everybody was late to school. And so we need a system. We need to figure it out because they are super frustrated with listening to my annoying voice. And I am super frustrated with having to repeat it over and over again.
Yeah.
So, but I would say in general, my heart is good. Mainly because, not to like jump right into our topic, but I feel that I have people that I can share stuff like that with. And so I don't feel alone on this kind of thing. I think that when we are parenting or living at all, and we feel like we're the only one experiencing something, it makes it so much harder.
Yes.
And like anything, literally anything. It's like, I can't find pants that fit. Like, and I don't mean that like you can't fit because they're too tight. Maybe they don't fit because like they have a gap in the back or like they're too long or they're too short. Like it doesn't have to be a weight thing. It can just be like, my pants don't fit. Sure. Like whatever it is, I can't find coffee I like any experience feels lonely if you don't share it with other people. And so I think one thing that I know feels good, is being able to share and being able to be open and vulnerable, that I can share like, yeah, my family, like we're very annoyed with each other right now. We love each other, but we're a little frustrated.
Yeah. It does create l- less of a feeling of isolation. I said that in the negative, but that's not how I meant it. Um, but it can also be really hard to share what's going on in your real world, right? Not your curated world, but in your real day to day, minute to minute, breath to breath kind of life. And that can be super uncomfortable to share. It can be, and unless everything's great for the moment, and then sometimes we really want to share. But when things are hard, or when you feel like you're not doing things well or not completing tasks you feel like you should be able to complete, there's a lot of like shoulds and oughts and shame caught up in all of that. um but I think when you feel like, all of that is going on and you don't share it, it gets this weight to it. I know you've used the example of like the rocks in the backpack and carrying that a lot. And it's very much that concept of, if you are carrying around the heaviness of life all by yourself, and I don't mean you like foist your problems off on other people, right? But if you don't even give them voice, like if you don't acknowledge their existence and share it with somebody, anybody, then that gets very heavy, very isolating and lonely. And I've certainly been in that position before. I think in various stages of my life from childhood to now. And those are the hardest times, when we are trying to carry everything alone and by our, in our own minds and hearts and spirits. I've been thinking about this a lot. Um, this season of the year, like autumn, is tends to be really hard for me. And I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out why. Like, okay, I love fall. Like, I love the change in the weather. I love the change in the environment. I like my kids going back to school, even though the first few weeks is rough. Like, I'm happy for them to be out of the house. It's a lot easier to work from home when they're not here. Um, and so I spent a lot of time trying to figure it out, and I still don't have an answer. Like, I don't have oh, well, these five things happened, in the fall in my lifetime, and therefore, like, it triggers some, body response or whatever. It's I don't know what it is, but I do know that talking about it and
Mhm.
putting it out there and saying, hey, you know what? This is a really tough time of year for me. I am really struggling. I can't exactly tell you why. Like, I can't give you the details of some specific reason that it's happening. But it tends to be really hard for me, has made it easier, right? Like, when I talk to you, Tova, and I tell you what, oh, I spent all night having nightmares and I don't even know why. Like, I'm a grown ass human and I'm having nightmares, and that's weird for me. Um, all of those things make it easier to carry and to accept and deal with and experience, and know that, like, okay, this is a tough moment, but it's not a forever moment, right? Like, this isn't the rest of my life. This is right now. So all of that is a very long-winded way to introduce our topic for
Well,
today.
and I think it's a really a great example. And I think we're starting sort of at the end, but at the beginning, we're making the end the beginning,
Hmm.
because we're talking about vulnerability and this concept of how we can have an open heart, but also how we protect our heart, right? And it's interesting, being vulnerable is one of the, I think, strongest things that you can possibly be. But at the same time, you're opening yourself up to these feelings that we consider to be weak feelings, or it's considered to be weak. And I read a transcript of a interview from a TED Talk between Adam Grant, who is a organizational psychologist, and Brene Brown. And if you know me, which if you listen to the podcast, you do basically, you know that I could listen to the two of them speak to each other forever.
Yeah.
Like the two, like Brene Brown and then organizational psychology is my jam. Like I just two of them, they could talk forever and I would listen. But they talked about how vulnerability without boundaries is not vulnerability. Like it is just spewing
Yeah.
of information. And I think that that's really important because you don't have to, and we're going to get to definitions, I promise, really soon, but you don't have to share all of the nitty gritty details of your life with somebody to be vulnerable with them. You don't have to share, like Riley, you don't even know why this is a difficult time of year for you. So you couldn't share if you
Right.
wanted to. But you can still open up. If somebody like you could still say, like, someone's like, how are you doing? You're like, I'm doing great. It's a weird time of year for me, man. Like, I don't know why. And that could be enough. Like, if it's a health scare, but you don't want to share all the details, you can say, yeah, I'm having some health issues, or a family member's having some, like, you don't need to share those things. From like a leadership position, because Brene Brown talks a lot about this, it doesn't benefit a company for the leader to be sharing like, well, we're not sure we're going to be able to hit payroll this month.
Right.
Like that doesn't benefit anybody. But to say like, we would really benefit as a company to learn from you. We would benefit to get more from everyone. So we're putting out this survey because we could, whatever the case might be. There's ways to be vulnerable, but still set boundaries. And so I think I just want to highlight that, even though it was going to be something maybe we talked about later, because you just gave a great example of that. Like you were able to share a struggle without getting into the details. And I think it's important that we say that right up front, because if you're listening and you're like, I don't want to share all the details of my life. I don't want everybody to know what's going on. Well, they don't have to. And there's still ways to open up and be vulnerable without sharing all the details.
Yeah. And I think it's important to understand that sometimes, I think you said this already, Tova, but I just want to reiterate because it's important. Sometimes sharing all the details is not, in fact, vulnerability. It's the opposite, because if you share it for the purpose of pushing people away or for the purpose of creating, some sort of differentiation between you and the rest of the world so that you're, an island and everybody else is happily going about their lives, that's not really vulnerability. That's a little bit of shock and awe,
Mm-hmm.
and venting, which is, everyone needs to vent. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think we all know when somebody's an oversharer, right? Like we know the oversharers in our lives, and I don't personally count that as vulnerability because it doesn't serve the purpose of creating connection. And that's really what vulnerability is about, is creating pathways, whatever the word is that I want. I'm just combining words today. Creating pathways to create stronger relationships, right? There's a lot of creating in that. But that's what vulnerability is about. It's about building community, and whether that's a community of you and one other person or you and 1,000 other people, it's still the same concept.
Yeah, 100%. So speaking of what vulnerability isn't and is, let's take a quick break and we will come right back with definitions. Know what I really love to do?
Take baths, go for walks, read, drink margaritas, hike.
Yeah, not what I was referring to. We're recording a commercial right now.
I do, but I'm thinking outside the box, being adaptable.
As I was saying, what I love to do is host our live monthly workshops.
Oh, right. That's what we were talking about. Me too. They are a lot of fun to put together and host every month. And we can bring margaritas, so.
Join us for live conversation as we get a bit deeper into topics near and dear to our hearts. We go through everything from self-care to setting boundaries.
We share coaching tips, practical advice, and take questions from the audience. It's a whole lot of fun.
Sign up for our newsletter today at goboldlyinitiative.com/contact to make sure you hear about all the upcoming Go Boldly workshops.
You definitely don't want to miss out. Now, back to that show.
All right, welcome back. So let's jump off with a definition of vulnerability. So vulnerability is a state of emotional exposure that comes with a degree of uncertainty. Learning how to be vulnerable involves a willingness to accept the emotional risk that comes from being open and willing to love and be loved. That was not a official Merriam-Webster definition, but I liked it a little bit better.
Yep.
According to Brene Brown, who I have called the queen of vulnerability, because she has spent a lot of time researching it.
Yeah.
Vulnerability is at the core of shame, fear, and the struggle for worthiness. It is also the birthplace of joy, creativity, and belonging. And I highlight those. I literally bolded them in our outline because when I was reading them in the article, they're right next to each other. Like their vulnerability is both of those things at the same time. So when we are talking about how is your heart, or we're talking about having an open heart and closed heart and protecting your heart, it all comes back to vulnerability. And we both just read Braving the Wilderness. Is that the book we just read?
I think
first?
so. Yeah.
Okay.
Wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. And she talks about how you can't have vulnerability. You can't have courage without vulnerability, right? You can't, for lack of a better word, you can't be brave unless you're scared. You can't be brave unless you're afraid, essentially. And so I wanted to also give the definition of courage. And now this is the Merriam-Webster definition of courage. It is the mental or moral strength to venture, persevere, and withstand danger, fear, or difficulty. So you need to be able to be vulnerable to be able to be courageous. And I just think that is a nice reminder that every time we see somebody being courageous or being brave, they are choosing to be vulnerable and they're choosing to put themselves out there. And now to dig a little deeper into vulnerability, there are the research that I delved a little deeper into that was not specifically Brene Brown, because I did try to find some research that was not Brene Brown. There was some described as non-conscious vulnerability, which is basically this idea that's just the kind of vulnerability that we have just by existing, right? Like you could get hit by a car, you could see trauma, just, by existing, we are vulnerable because we are not a rock, basically.
Because we have a human experience.
Yeah, the human experience, exactly.
Yeah.
But then there is conscious vulnerability. And this is what we lean into. This is what we choose. We take risks. We go up to people and we ask them out on dates. We do karaoke. We put ourselves out there to be embarrassed, or charades. And I love this line that says your greatest emotional strength when you make a choice to be vulnerable. And it says choosing to be vulnerable means you are choosing to face sadness, shame, hopelessness, anger, embarrassment, disappointment, or frustration. And it's not that you're choosing those things, but you are choosing the chance that those things could happen. That you are saying, I'm going to risk it, right? I'm taking a risk. I am opening up my heart to be trampled, basically. And I think that when we ask, how is your heart? we need to hopefully cultivate a life where our hearts are strong enough. I don't know if that's the right word, but that we feel comfortable, that we can be vulnerable enough that we're willing to face those things.
Yeah. And I think even, just to take that even further, when we're talking about how is your heart, we're talking about to what degree are you allowing yourself to be vulnerable in the world, right? Are you closed off entirely? Are you overly vulnerable? Are where are you on that spectrum? Because it is, it's a spectrum. Not everyone's going to
Mm-hmm.
be the same. I don't, and nor should they be. Um, and you're not going to be the same with everybody, right? Like there are people we meet who we just instantly connect with. There are people we meet who it takes years for us to form a relationship with. There's people we meet who are like never going to be friends. We're never going to connect on any level. And that all is okay. There's nothing critical in any of those statements, right? There's no problem with those things. The people are different and unique and interesting in their own ways, and we don't all have to be best friends, and some of us will be. But all of those feelings, even the ones where you're like, no, I don't choose this person, require a degree of vulnerability because you have to be open enough to experience the feelings. You have to be open enough to be willing to have conversation, and real conversation, not like, the superficial kind of conversation we all have in passing. Um, and being able to do that allows you to actually answer the question of how is your heart, right? Like
Yeah.
if you are not ever allowing yourself to be vulnerable with others or with your community or in your life, then your heart is completely closed off. You're not experiencing life around you. Um, and so obviously what we're suggesting is that that's not great for for you or other people. And you can change that. You can make different choices is ultimately what it comes down to. So why is it important to be vulnerable? I mean, I just sort of answered that question on the meta scale, I guess. But if you want to dig deeper into it and look at things, the research that you did, Tova, um, when you are vulnerable, you get stronger. Like you individually get stronger on the inside. You become more resilient. You have a more fulsome life where you experience more feelings and more experiences. I don't know how else to describe it. It's a way of communicating with the world around you that allows you to actually inhabit the world around you. And it also gives you stronger relationships. Like we all know that our best relationships are the ones wherein we are most honest. And that requires vulnerability. Again, you can't be who you are. You can't be your authentic self without allowing for some degree of vulnerability.
Yeah, I don't know why, as I was writing this, I kept thinking about President Obama. Like, and I don't know why. I don't know why he kept popping into my head, but I just kept thinking about how, and I don't know, I was talking to my son yesterday, maybe. We were talking about, I asked him, we were watching the Jason Kelsey documentary. It always comes back to the Philadelphia Eagles if I can make it happen. And I asked my son, was Jason Kelsey the best athlete ever? Was he ever the best athlete on the field? And he said, no. And I said, is he the smartest athlete on the field? And he said, yeah. And then we talked about President Obama. And I said, is President Obama usually the smartest person in the room? And he said, yes. And I said, but is he vulnerable enough to know that even if he's the smartest person in the room, he doesn't know the most about everything? So he made sure that there were people in the room that knew more about everything than he did, right? Like that they each knew more about something than he did, so that he could get smarter, so that he could learn more, so that he had experts. And then I think about how Michelle in her book described like President Obama would just be like, yeah, let's take this community activism job. I'm going to leave the firm and just go over to do it. Like he was constantly taking risks. He was just like throwing himself into these career path switches, and he was being incredibly vulnerable and setting himself up for failure and embarrassment. And he was taking these leaps that were filled with vulnerability because they were filled with huge amounts of risk, but he was allowing himself to take up space. And it, I mean, it sounds very scary to me. But all of that takes courage, and like we said earlier, it requires vulnerability to do all of those things. So I think if you want to, like, I hate the be the best version of yourself, but if you want to be the most authentic version of yourself, if you want to see what it is you can truly do in this world, you're going to have to fail. You're going to have to mess up. You're probably going to be embarrassed. You're going to be disappointed. You're going to be sad. It's all going to take vulnerability. And like you said, with connections, I think also with parenting, like to be the best parent we can be. And I don't mean to be like, I didn't even say be a good parent. I just mean like the best parent we can be. And it's something that, you know, I know I've said this to you because somebody said it to me, like when I've had like really rough days parenting and I'm just at the end of my rope. And it was Annie, like I would text her, I'm like, just can't do this because I'm this and I'm tired and blah, 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 blah. And she'd be like, well, have you told the kids that? Like, because I'll be like, I feel so bad. Like, I'm just so mean right now. And she'll be like, did you tell the kids how upset? And I know I've said that to you.
Yeah.
And I know it's like really annoying feedback to get. But sometimes, every once in a while, my kids are like, oh, okay. Like, there's a feeling when you're vulnerable, even with your kids, a feeling suddenly of like, oh, we're all in this together.
Yeah.
Like, even today or last night or at some point in the last 24 hours, I said to my middle, like, I know you're frustrated with me because I'm constantly annoyed with you not doing things.
Mm.
And like, I'm frustrated with you. Like I said, we're just in a frustration cycle. We will figure our way out of it. And like being vulnerable is such a powerful way. It is so powerful to connect with other people.
Yeah. And it also can really diffuse negative situations, right? Like
Yeah.
if you find yourself, and this, let me just be very clear, this is extraordinarily hard to do.
Mm.
But
Oh,
if
yeah.
you find yourself in an argument with your spouse, for instance, and it's just escalating, right? Like everything's going up and up and up, and you're fighting and you're fighting and you're fighting. And it's about, like dumb things that we all argue with our partners about when we live in a small space together or a big space together, whatever. Um, but the easiest and quickest way to put an end to that escalation is to allow yourself to be vulnerable. Now, that requires a lot of trust because if your partner is like abusive or narcissistic or, in some way, shape, or form manipulating or awful, then it can go very, it can go very wrong. I don't mean to laugh at it, but it's just like the ridiculousness of what could happen is just awful.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, as an aside, if your partner is abusive or narcissistic, I would suggest maybe getting a therapist and not being vulnerable with them, but
yes,
continue.
yes, that's where I was headed. But
Yeah.
if you are in a healthy relationship with another healthy individual and you find yourself in that scenario, it's a great way to change the temperature of the conversation, right? Like to just be able to say, you know what, you really hurt my feelings. These are the things that hurt my feelings. This is why I feel the way I feel. And take some of that heat away will allow the conversation to actually be productive. Now, that's super hard to do because we all get mad and we get heated and things happen. But if you find yourself capable of doing it, which, every now and then we all are, I think, try it and see what happens because it makes such a, I mean, like when my husband and I get into that when we can do that, it makes our relationships so much better.
Well, and I would add that you can get vulnerable with yourself in much the same way
Yeah.
that you can get vulnerable with your partner. So you can have that same, essentially the same conversation that you have with your partner with yourself. Like, and Brene in her Netflix, TED Talk, books, whatever, you can be like, the story I'm telling myself is that my kids are spoiled brats and all I do is work all day. And now I'm cleaning up after them and all I want to do is sit down and blah, blah, blah. And I'm just cleaning this kitchen and this is awful and nobody appreciates, and like you can have a heart to heart with yourself. And you can be like, maybe what you really need to do is go outside and take your Kindle and stand in the grass and read your Kindle for 5 minutes, or whatever it is, like, or whatever it is you need. Like you can have a heart to heart and get vulnerable with yourself. And you're like, it doesn't make sense in a way because you're like, well, it's you. But sometimes we need to have heart to hearts with ourselves as much as we needed to have it with anybody else around us.
Yeah. I think in addition to like changing whatever it is you're doing, you can dig deeper into whatever it is you're feeling, right? Like, as if you're feeling angry, frustrated, irritated, like tired of nagging the household or a friend or a coworker or whatever, you might want to stop and like dig a little deeper into that feeling and see what's underneath it. Like when my kids don't do what I ask them for to do, I get mad, but I also feel really disrespected. And I don't like that feeling. Like the feeling of being disrespected is very unpleasant to me. I don't think anyone likes it, but like if I'm digging deep enough, I'm not just mad that they're not doing things. I'm mad that they don't respect me. And that's the feeling underneath. And so if I say to them, "Oh, I'm so frustrated. You're just not doing anything I tell you to do." Well, I'm not teaching them anything, right? Like, I mean, maybe I'm teaching them a little bit, but not really. If I say to them, it feels very disrespectful when you don't put away your dishes after dinner, right? Like if I say something like that and then I say, I work very hard, I do these things, and this is why it feels very disrespectful to me, then it's a much different conversation. I have opened myself up to the possibility that my 6-year-old is going to mock me. And very likely he is, but I'm a grown up, so I can handle it. But it's the same in any other context, right? Like you're going to open yourself up to that, the risk that someone is going to shame you or be mean to you or manipulate you or whatever it is, but you're also opening yourself up to the possibility that it's going to end well, that it's going to create a positive change.
I think also though, when you were just like, when you're complaining, like, or when you're saying, I'm so frustrated, like just bring your dishes over, just bring your dishes from the table to the sink. It feels like complaining.
Right.
It doesn't feel like vulnerability. It feels like you're complaining because you're ordering and complaining. When you say, I am so frustrated, I feel so disrespected, I made you dinner, which listen, I love to make you dinner because I want you to eat and grow. And that's like part of what happens here. And I get it. But like all I'm asking you to do is this one thing. And it feels so disrespectful that I have to ask you 5 times to do it. And it really hurts my feelings.
Right.
And it really upsets me. Now, you might still get a snarky comment, but you have at least been vulnerable and you've attempted to establish a connection. And at least one of your 2 kids will probably respond with, like 2 of my 3 kids will respond well. The third will probably have already gone to his bedroom.
Right.
But like, and he'll feel really bad later. But like you will have made a connection and you would have also shown him, even if he doesn't respond well in the moment, how to use his words and how to say, this is what I'm feeling underneath. And I think that is really important because I think that it is so comfortable. I don't want to say easy. It's not easy being angry. It's not easy being sad. It's not easy being frustrated, but it is comfortable.
It's a much more convenient feeling, right?
Yeah.
It's not easy to feel, but it's easier to manage.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we've been doing it for like ever. I mean, I have a friend whose son is 2.5, and he's like super good at being frustrated and sad and angry.
Yeah.
Like he's
All those
less
big
good at
feelings.
being like, Mommy, I'm having some big feelings right
Right.
now, but we should discuss them and we can be vulnerable and connect later.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
we do need to take one more break, and then maybe we can give some tips on how to be vulnerable. We have a great example of someone that we are working on working with. And we will be we can, and she has been just amazingly vulnerable recently, so we'd love to share that, and we'll be right back.
In case you didn't already know, we love talking.
True story. More than simply talking, we love researching, prepping, and bringing this podcast to life.
We launched We Go Boldly with the goal of reaching people dealing with the kinds of questions and concerns that we also face.
Things like how to hear my inner voice, how to make sure my habits are worth it and stick, how do I feel my feelings and still manage to function.
After years of personal work and lots of trial and error, we realized we have a lot to share on these topics.
Now we've been broadcasting for over a year, and we are proud of our podcast.
And to no one's surprise, we still have a lot to say and talk about.
We sure do. We need your help to keep going. Every episode takes time and money to create, and we would love your support.
So, if you like what we are doing, please support us by joining our Patreon community and becoming a monthly subscriber.
Join our Patreon community today at patreon.com/wegoboldly. We are so grateful to all of our supporters. Now, back to the show. All right, welcome back. We are going to spend the rest of our time talking about ways that we can be vulnerable, although we've kind of already kicked that off. But we just had an experience this week with someone that we're going to be working with our podcast. And to be honest, we have had to be vulnerable a lot this summer and this fall, where we've had to say, hey, we need to ask for your flexibility for your grace as we need to push things back or reschedule. But as part of the research, I read, and I know you've read just throughout reading over the last 10 years of your life, a lot of
Right.
research about vulnerability and leadership in the workplace and how to be vulnerable. And a lot of it is just about leading with vulnerability and being willing to, once again, not share everything, but just share enough that you say, like, thank you for your patience. It's not, you don't need to apologize,
Right.
you just, you don't need to apologize for needing more time. You just say, thank you for your patience. I needed to take a step away. I needed to take a break. I needed to do X, Y, or Z. You don't need to share all the details. But we had someone come to us and say, I needed to take a step away to address something, in my personal life. And I really appreciate a couple more weeks. And it was such a lovely note. And of course, we said, of course,
Right.
do what you need to do. We appreciate your graciousness. We always support people needing to do what they need to do. And it was a really nice exchange. But she was showing vulnerability, and we really appreciated it. And I feel like somebody that we already felt this wonderful connection to, it made it a stronger connection.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we both agreed it was a great example of what we were going to talk about today, but it was literally 2 text messages.
Yeah. And what it does is it fosters trust and understanding, right? Like the more somebody allows you to see their humanity, the more you can trust them. And I think this was, as you said, to us, such a great example of leading with that and being open and honest. Now, you and I are pretty transparent and we talk a lot about what's going on in our lives on the show. And everywhere. But that doesn't mean we go into the nitty-gritty details of every single thing. And it's different than, I think, if, somebody, we were having a one-on-one conversation with somebody like what we just experienced. And so that in doing that and in being honest about like where that person is in their life in this moment, I personally like it allows me to trust that person more, right? Because if
Mhm.
they're going to tell me the truth instead of, maybe what it comes down to for me is the minute you tell me something that I can sense is a lie, like it's game over, right? Like I'm not going to trust you anymore because you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. And whether it was, you know, all the details of the truth or just like, listen, some stuff is going on. I need some time. I will get back to you or whatever, then I'm much more likely to trust that person. Um, which leads us, I guess, to this conversation of how it is that you can be vulnerable. I just want to circle back real quick to the idea of being vulnerable with yourself. And I think vulnerability starts there, right? Like it starts with your ability to be honest with yourself and your willingness to dig into who you are and your willingness to do what we were just talking about, which is like, what's the emotion under the emotion, right? Like, what's the feeling buried deep down beneath the anger or the sadness or the,
Mhm.
even the joy, right? Like, what is underneath all of it that is either causing or contributing to your experience in life. And once we start doing that, that allows us to be vulnerable with other people. But if we're not even being honest with ourselves, like it's very hard to be honest with other people, obviously.
Now,
Um,
I would just say real
mm,
fast.
yeah, go.
There's some, if you're just like, what do you mean? When I'm sad, I'm sad. When I'm frustrated, I'm frustrated. There are some exercises, like generic ones that you can do that can be fun. I don't know, like, party fun. But I know with the boys we've done where like we take a construction piece of paper, we fold it. I want to say fold it in half, but that's not what I'm looking for. And you can't see what I'm doing because it's a podcast, but you can go to YouTube and watch my hands. We fold it so the two ends meet in the sense so that we
It makes
like
like a pamphlet, basically.
pamphlet, yeah. And so on the outside, you would have like anger, sadness, frustration. And then the inside, you could think of all the things that they might be covering up. And it would be generic, but it might be just like a brainstorming session.
Yeah.
And it could be something that you did with your family. You could do it for yourself. But sometimes it's easier to do these things generically to start.
Yep.
And then you have it as a reminder. Um, the other thing, and I know I've said this story so many times, but I want to say it one more time, which is this was the 2020 Thanksgiving. It was the weekend before. I was celebrating Thanksgiving with the boys on that Sunday prior, but the Saturday before, the boys and I were just at each other's throats. We were so annoyed with each other. And I was thinking, how are we going to be grateful tomorrow? Like, we had soccer games and it was so cold. And we were just like, pick, 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 pick. It was just all of us. And so we decided, I don't think it was a full moon, but we decided to do a full moon ceremony and we were going to write out all the things that were bothering us and we were going to burn them. And it took less than a minute. My brother, my mom, we all got very quickly to COVID and that we couldn't have a normal Thanksgiving. And suddenly, once we realized that we were really just angry that COVID had ruined our normal Thanksgiving, a weight lifted. And then we were fine. We burned those pieces of paper and we had a phenomenal Sunday Thanksgiving, to the point that even though we had like regular Thanksgiving food, we also had chicken tenders and like apple cider, like a sparkling apple cider. Mike, did we not bring chicken tenders and sparkling apple cider to your house the following year on Thanksgiving?
You did.
We did, because that is a new tradition.
I like it.
So it can happen. You can do something like that. You can say, you know what, we are just having we are in a frustration cycle and we are going to write it out. And you can get there quicker than you think you can.
Yeah.
So if you're vulnerable.
Right. And I like the idea of doing it sort of generically in the sense that once you've done it like once and thought about all the all the way in which emotions are interconnected, right? The way in which we all feel multiple things at any given time. It's not like it's almost never the case that you're just sad or you're just happy
Yeah.
or you're just, like that just doesn't that's not how the complexity of human minds work. Um and so if you do it like you said in this sort of generic way, it helps you to make those connections when you're actually in the feeling, right? Like when the feeling is happening around you, it's easier to then be like, oh, wait a minute. I remember sometimes when I'm angry, I'm actually sad and, make those connections a little more easily.
Also, just one more thing. And I know we promised we were going to be like, here are ways to be more vulnerable, but we are talking about those.
Yeah, we are.
Other great questions to be able to ask yourself. And I think this takes vulnerability too, because it's all about having an open heart. It's all about willing to recognize that the first feeling might not be the feeling. And you have to be you have to be a little courageous and a little vulnerable to be able to be that.
Yeah.
Other important questions. Am I hungry?
Yes.
Am I tired? Do I need to pee?
Am I sick?
Do I need to take a shower? Could I be sick? All of these things. Do I need a hug?
Right.
Like, do I need a cup of tea? Like, all of these things are legit. Like, they are so, like, you called me yesterday or the day before, and you were like, one of your kids was angry and mean and losing it. And I was like, is he hungry? Like, did something bad happen at
Right.
school? Like, and I don't know what, I mean, you ended up figuring it out, but like those things happen to me too sometimes where I'm like, and sometimes I have to just stop and be like, you haven't eaten in 6 hours. You don't know when you last drank water. I don't think you've peed. Like, I mean, I've always peed, but like,
Yeah.
there's, these are important things. And the only way those questions work is if you're willing to ask them.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're just like a bull in a china shop, like we have to open our heart to ourselves. And so I don't know where that falls and what a snazzy way of saying this is how you're vulnerable, but we have to be. I don't know if that's learning. I'm looking at our list. I don't know if that's learning to love yourself or knowing that you're important enough to take care of yourself or embracing who you are or where this is, but
All of the above, perhaps.
all of the above. But we need to recognize that we need those things, and that top layer of feeling is often just that. It's just the fondant. When you get to the buttercream.
Yeah. And the fondant always tastes disgusting, just as a side note.
It's pretty.
So a few other things we have, as we do, we have a long list of ways in which to learn to be more vulnerable, to help yourself be more vulnerable, other than what we've already just kind of gone through, which I think is the beginning of the whole process. But, I really like this one in your list, Ova, and it's stop trying to prove your value. So we have had an entire season, I think, on worth and the fact that you are worthy simply because you exist. And that's the full sentence. There's nothing else to it. And yet, I think we find ourselves trying to prove we are worthy, that we have value, that we are contributing in some way. And that if we find ourselves lacking, then, somehow that means we are not valuable or not worthy. It becomes like an all or nothing sort of equation. And when we stop trying to prove our value, we stop trying to prove to everybody that we're worthwhile, and we stop, worrying that people will just leave us and not care about us and not care for us, because we know we're deserving of all of those good feelings and all of those good things happening in our lives. And it allows us to just, and just has snuck back into my vocabulary, and I'm not happy about it. Anyway, sorry, I digress. But when we stop trying to prove our value, we allow ourselves to be vulnerable. And so I think that should go at the top of the list personally.
I agree. I also really like remembering that you can't be everything to everyone.
Mm.
You touched on this a little bit about, you don't have to connect with everybody in the same way.
Yeah.
You can be, you can be buddies and that like you say hi at the pickup line to people, and then you can be like super besties with other people.
Right.
A lot of this being vulnerable comes down to accepting who you are, because, warts and all,
Yeah.
which means embracing mistakes, embracing that you got here because of who you are. Everything that's happened to you is because of who you are, not in spite of who you are, but because of who you are. And so it's important to embrace those mistakes. And I think the only way to truly, truly love yourself is to be vulnerable. I don't think you're going to get there. I don't think you're actually going to be able to, if the goal, which seems to be one of the very popular goals, is to find out who your authentic self is, you're not going to find that person without being vulnerable.
Right.
And if the goal is to be able to open your heart in a safe way, right? In a way that's going to keep you, I mean, safe in a way that like keeps you protected with healthy boundaries, you're going to need to be vulnerable. It's the only way it works.
Yeah. And I think just to clarify for anyone who's getting confused, because I know it can be confusing. Yes, be vulnerable. No, don't give away everything. Yes, set boundaries. Don't set them too high, right? Like that can feel like, wait, what are they saying? Um, it's a balance. It's a balance just like everything else in life. So you have to figure out where it works for you and where it doesn't. And your level of vulnerability with a variety of people is going to be different. And your vulnerability with yourself is going to be different than your vulnerability with other people. So it's not black and white, it's not all or nothing. There is a continuum, a spectrum, whatever you want to call it, of how this is going to play out in your life. The key is a lot of trial and error, right? Like we all it, I think it's, I use the example of trying to find a therapist all the time. It's or like dating, right? Like you got to try it on and see what works for you. There's going to be times where you share too much and you'll be like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I just told all those people those things. And that's too much. And now I feel very uncomfortable and it's not working out. And there's going to be other times where it's the just right amount. It will depend on the circumstances, the context, where you're at in your own life. But the key is to start with yourself. The key is to start looking internally, find that inner voice, figure out what's really going on the inside in order to actually have these sort of more vulnerable relationships and conversations in your community, whatever that looks like.
And by the way, spewing personal information, oversharing, those are like classic trauma responses.
Yeah.
So if you have been there, and I'm going to raise my hand.
Oh, yes. Yes.
It's okay. Like, don't feel guilty. Move on. It's fine. There are very random people around my town that know some very personal details. And in turn, I know some personal details about some very random people.
Right.
And it happens. And then I've learned to set boundaries now. But sometimes it has to come out of you. It just has to come out.
Yeah.
And no, that was not me being vulnerable. That was just like, it literally just had to get out of me.
Yeah.
And so, like you said, it's a balance and we're learning.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to wrap up. But it is, figuring out how to answer, how is your heart? Vulnerability is a big part of that. It's a big part of everything, but, we have homework. If I'm to be vulnerable, I'll tell you that I don't know what our homework is. But I think we need to practice some vulnerability this week. And I think what that looks like is taking a risk, opening our heart up. So I would like to challenge all of us to do something that is outside of our comfort zone. Now, This could be doing something like really outside your comfort zone, like, I don't know, applying for a job that you wouldn't normally apply for. This could, or sending a text to somebody that like you want to reconnect with from high school that you've been like wanting to connect with, but like you just think they don't want to connect with you because it's been so long, and you just, something like that. Or maybe it's someone that you had a falling out with, but it's been so long and you just miss them so much. Just something that you need to take a risk. And maybe it is karaoke. Maybe it is charades. Maybe you haven't gone for a run in a really long time because you haven't lost baby weight and you're embarrassed and you think people are going to point and laugh. By the way, they won't. Nobody, like literally nobody cares what you look like when you run. But like whatever it is, something you haven't done because you're afraid of sadness or fear or embarrassment, and it is going to require you to be vulnerable. You will also be courageous when you do it. So let's pick something. I'm going to think of something. Riley's going to think of something.
Yes.
We will report back. You let us know what it is that you do. It can be like huge in the world. It can be small in the world, but in your world, it is going to feel really, really big and scary. And that's really exciting. So let's all do something vulnerable this week.
Sounds good to me. All right, everyone. Well, in the meantime, we will be back next week with another interview and conversation about how is your heart. Get to your homework. Let's get it done and do some sharing. You can find us on social media at Go Boldly Together. You can find us on LinkedIn. You can find us on the internet. You can find us everywhere. So make sure you've subscribed to the show and you rate and review when you have time. We would appreciate it. Until next week, everyone, take care and have some fun.
Thanks so much for listening to We Go Boldly podcast. We know you're busy and we love spending time with you.
If you enjoyed this week's episode, let us know. Head to Apple Podcasts right now to rate and review our show. While you're there, be sure to click that subscribe button.
Want more us time? Follow us on all the socials at Go Boldly Together.
Want even more us time? As in all the coaching pizzazz. Find us at goboldlyinitiative.com for all the info.
We will be back with more excitement, research, and deep thoughts next week.
Until then, keep on being the bold, brave, amazing people we know you already are.